Hello and welcome back to the Tin Barn. I'm Pragmatic Lee, and as that intro video might indicate, we're going to talk a little bit today about the general, 825 model drill bit sharpener. Now, we're going to talk just a little bit about the sharpener itself. There are dozens of videos on YouTube showing its use, and I will go over a little bit of its use and its features in today's video. But the main gist of today's video is the stand I made to use it on. If you recall, in the last couple of videos, in one I made some flange washers to go on each side of the sharpening stone, and then in the last video I made the arbor to mount the stone on the motor shaft. So today we're going to look at what I decided to or look at the way that I decided to mount this. I told you in that last video that I would explain a little bit more in detail of why I chose to make a dedicated stand versus just using it on my bench grinder. Here's a quick image or a little image of the my bench grinder. It's just one come from Lowe's. I think might be $65, $70 or something like that. But as you can see, it's got a shield over the end of the wheel, which would make access to the side of the grinding wheel somewhat limited. I don't think there's room to make a full swing in there in that little area that's exposed. And I didn't want to take that shield off because that's part of the structure of the entire guard around that. And a second reason was the center height. If you notice in this picture, with a drill bit installed in the jig, it is a couple of inches higher than the center line of my bench grinder, and that would have probably been okay for grinding. But again, I wanted it as much on center line as possible, and I did not want to mess with the shield on that bench grinder. So that's why I decided to make this dedicated sharpening station. Now, I didn't try to video making this stand because the only thing that I really did to this stand or making this stand was drill and tap some holes. That was the main gist of it, and machined a couple of stacking blocks here. This is all aluminum. This is all material that I had. The only expense I've got in this whatsoever is the wheel, the on and off switch, and the attachment itself. Everything else, the motor, the aluminum base, these riser blocks, this little wrench holder, I had all that. Well, I did have to buy a few screws. Underneath the bottom of it, I have some rubber feet on there. I've got 5. As long as this span was in there, I was noticing a little bit of sag in the middle, so I put a foot under there as well. That helps cushion a little bit of the vibration from the motor spinning itself. I put these blocks in there. Remember I said on my bench grinder over there, the wheel or the height was near about 2 inches above the center line. And I wanted this attachment to be as much on center line as possible. So these were, I believe, was that 3 inches? Yes, 3 inches is what it took to raise that up. And all these are some 1 inch thick aluminum blocks that are screwed in, bolted in from the bottom. Again, those feet allow for some clearance here for these bolt heads as well. And then the blocks were drilled and tapped on both sides and the motor mounted. Right now I have the motor, don't know whether you can tell, but the slots in the motor frame, I have the motor pushed all the way to the back of that. And what that will allow is, as the stone starts wearing a little bit, I can loosen these and pull the motor and the stone out so that I'm actually working on another section of the wheel. Of course, I can turn the wheel around as well. Now, in one of those previous videos, several folks commented that I should have this paper washer that's on the back side over here. There's a paper washer over here. You might can see some remnants of it right here. I just trimmed it up close to the edge, or close to this flange washer. And again, the flange washers were to distribute that load around a 2-inch parameter. The 2-inch was the minimum, according to the specs on that wheel, was the minimum size. Now, as far as wiring the motor, I just run a simple wire over to this inline switch over here. This switch is actually a waterproof switch. And the reason I got that, it was, I think, like $12 for 2 of them. So about $6 a piece. Well, I wanted something that was tight, sealed tight, because there's a lot of dust in sharpening a drill bit. The other thing I did that was outside the realm of the other videos that you see online of these being used, these have to be mounted down. You can't hold it and grind at the same time. It's going to move around. So that was another reason I wanted a dedicated station, was that I didn't want this have to put it on and off each time I was using it on my bench grinder. This again has to be mounted down, but I wanted to be able to adjust that, or adjust that and keep it in line. And the reason you would adjust that, this attachment, according to the documentation with it, is will go from 1/8 inch to 3/4 inch drills, 3 millimeter to 19 millimeter. Now this is a 1/2 inch here, and let me look right quick, 5/32. A lot of difference in height or length, and you can get most of that difference in this adjustment right here. But if you need a little bit more, you can slide this back and forth. And I actually put 2 holes in this. This first one is the one most often used. But if I got an extra long bit, I can come back to this second hole. And this is all cast aluminum here. It's stout. It's got some gussets, 4 gussets on there, in case somebody heavy-handed tightening down. But what I decided to do, I milled this little brass bushing. That's the same height as this, or it's just maybe 10 or 12, 20 thousandths lower. And then 5/16 bolt. And that will hold it in place. I'll come back to this in just a second, but while I got the wrench in my hand, you might have noticed over here this little piece of aluminum tubing that I have mounted to that block. That's just wrench storage. I've got several sets of wrenches, sockets, the standard stuff in my toolboxes over there. But I've got a lot of piecemeal stuff, broken sets, wrenches that I've picked up at auctions and box lots and whatever. And when I've got something like this, I like to go find one of those extra wrenches and just store it with it. That way I don't have to go back and forth to the toolbox. Now if I'm doing a project that's going to require several different tools of course I'll work out of the toolbox. Now let's come back to this again right quick. The only thing I disliked about this to begin with, and it was extremely aggravating to me, was when I was using this rough adjustment here to make, again, to adjust for the length of the bit that I was sharpening. When I let go of that, it slide off, fall off on the table. And when you got a drill bit in one hand and you're trying to get this set up, to me that was just aggravating. And it was, in my thinking, it was an oversight on General's part. And this same product here, it was manufactured by General, sold under General name, but it was also sold under numerous other names as well. Craftsman even, or Sears even put the Craftsman name on this same General rig or attachment. But what I did was come down here to the end and drill an 1/8 inch hole about as close to the end as I could and just put a spring pin in there. And that, just a simple little adjustment or a simple little addition, keeps this from falling off. Another feature of these drill attachments is these angle adjust here. And I would recommend that you mount the drill bit that you're going to sharpen, you mount it in there and match this angle. You can see as that's up there, match the angle to the existing bit. Now that doesn't mean that you cannot change the angle on a bit. If you're willing to grind that much, you can, but be careful and don't lose the temper on the end of your drill bit down here. You can get them too hot. So I'd recommend just finding the one that matches. This one is 59 degrees, 68 degrees, 88 degrees, 49, and then there's one called CSK. I'm not sure what that CSK stands for. All right, let's look a little bit closer at the grinding attachment. You'll notice up here on this end, there's a little slide that's got a, get the bit out of the way and you might can see it better. It's got a point on there. The purpose of that is when you set your bit in, you want the flute to just touch that. You want this high enough that it will just go into that flute and stop the drill bit from turning when it gets drill pressure on. This part right up here with the thumb screw on it is what's going to hold the drill bit in down and hold it steady. But you need that slid up just enough to keep the bit from turning. And of course then you can do your adjustments down here on this end to get it in place. Now I will mention, when I got this, I was a little bit concerned again with it, even with it mounted down on this plate and with the motor on it. I'm going to say it probably weighs 30-35 pounds. But when I tried to move this, it was so stiff that I'd shift the whole plate. I tried to loosen these screws down here, but those screws, the way this is designed, it's either clamped or it's not clamped. There's no real adjustment here. So I just took some multi-purpose lube, Ballistol, I guess is how this is said. I've heard a lot of people complain about the smell of it, but I actually like the smell of that. And just give it a little squirt in there occasionally. And then you can slide it very freely. You can't imagine how tight that was when it first come out of the package. When you are sharpening your bit, you don't want to put a death grip on this and turn it, because you may introduce a little bit of tilt to it. And that was another thing, when it was so tight in there, I pretty much had to put a death grip on it to turn it. But with that little bit of lube, just take a finger and slide it from one side to the other. Now, I don't like to have my drill bits sticking out any more than I have to. And as you can see now, I have this angle set to match what the original grind on this was. Hopefully you can see that, but it would be something exaggerated like this. Whereas if you saw a big gap at one side, if it wasn't lined up, then just use this to line it up. Now the passing back and forth, we're going to use this down here to adjust the height up until we get a clean grind. I like to look at the flutes before I ever put the bit in and try to pick the one, if there is any difference between the two of them, try to pick the one that's in the worst shape. Because we're going to move this, gradually adjust that up until we've got a good grind on this flute. And everything is going to be locked in position as far as the advancement in. We'll then loosen this, move it around until this little tab here is catching on the next flute or the other flute, and tighten this back down. Now this clamp that's clamping that down is about 2 inches long. That gives plenty of space to bridge over the flutes, but that also would help in a situation like this where you've got a big end here and small down there. By clamping on this end, the chucking end of the bit won't necessarily be sitting down in this cradle. It may be kicked up a little bit because of the clamping down here. Now, as I was saying, once we get the worst flute dressed up and sharpened, we're going to want to rotate it. But once we rotate it, we don't want to adjust this anymore. If you do, you're going to leave that first flute longer than the last flute that you're grinding. If you can't take that much at one time, just be absolutely certain that if you have to go through more than one rotation, that you do it, that your last rotation is with this set in place. Now, I'm going to adjust this up just a little bit. We'll leave this tight. One of these is a advancing thumb nut, and the other one is a locking. So I'm going to loosen up the locking one and move that up. All right, I'm just scrubbing there. So I'm going to lock it down. Let me slide back over. My cord's not that long. And I'm going to turn this around just a little bit so hopefully you can see what's going on here. All right, this is in place. Shouldn't have to move that at all. Again, unless I get need to shorten some real short bits or some real long ones. All right, let's turn it on. And we'll get just a little touching this time around. All right, I'm going to loosen the lock wheel, the lock nut down here, and advance this up. And again, I'm doing my best not to put any undue torque on the swinging. All right, loosen my lock nut again, advance just a little, and take another. And of course, I think it goes without saying, you don't want to dwell with this. You want to make your pass and be done. If you dwell, you're going to get that bit hot. And if you get it hot, you're going to lose the temper on it. All right, I can see from looking down in here now, I've got a good clean up grind. So I'll turn my wheel off. And again, I can see I've got a good grind on that side. While that motor's winding down, I will say that this bit right here and the one that I sharpened at the beginning of this video are both 3/8 inch bits. And I had pretty much convinced myself I had ruined them. I got them too hot. I was drilling a piece of carbon steel, and it work hardened as I was drilling it, and the bits were in such bad shape I had turned them upside down in my drill index just to remind myself, don't even bother taking those out. But as you saw in that intro video, sharpening that one, and that was the worst of the two, it cut right through that metal when I went back to the drill press. All right, so let's loosen this, rotate our bit, and tighten it back down. Now we do not want to change this. Again, if we advance this flute any, it's going to be shorter than the one, and we would have to go back. And it should go without saying, this first pass on here is going to be a lot harder grinding, or a lot more grinding than it was when we were taking the gradual steps to begin with. And I won't just make several swings back and forth here. I don't think it would probably ever completely spark out. All right, there's another one sharpened. Let the wheel spin down, I'll take it out, and we'll turn. Trust me, I'm not switching stuff. I'm going to carry this bit back over there to the mill, and we're going to see how that sharpening did. All right, the piece I'm using for doing these test drills with is nothing real thick. It's an 1/8 inch piece, but the point is the bit sharpened? Will it cut through there? And please take my word for it, this bit wouldn't cut aluminum before I just did that sharpening. So let's see how it does now. This video is by no means sponsored by General or Amazon or anybody else. I don't do sponsored videos. But folks, this is a little tool I'd recommend. It's inexpensive. It's $22.38 is what it costs on Amazon. If you're not a Prime member, you'd probably have to pay a little shipping, and everybody had to pay a little tax on it. But to me, it's well worth the money. I've got drawers of drill bits that need some help. I'm going to take a day probably and get everything sharpened. Then I'm going to try to find a place to mount this sharpening station. I'm calling it a station. Like I was saying, I want to try to find a place here in the tin barn that I can set this up so that if I go to my drill index and get a drill out and realize it needs sharpening, I can walk right to this stand, put it in, sharpen it, and then go on about the project. I originally thought, well, this will be something I set up and get everything sharp and then maybe pull it out once or twice a year and resharpening those that that I had dulled or messed up. But I think now I've got a few empty spots here in the tin barn that I'll find a place just to set it up so I can walk to it at any time I need it, have the tools close by. And I just realized there's one other thing I failed to mention about making this stand for it to sit on. I was talking about how this mounted down, and if it was just over on the workbench, when you mounted it down, it would be a little bit difficult, or could be difficult, to keep it perpendicular with the stone. So I'll tilt over one more time here, and hopefully you can see down here. This is just a 1/4 inch thick piece of aluminum stock here that I milled out a channel for, and that channel is perpendicular to this, to the stone itself. So if I loosen, I can slide that back and forth and not worry about any twist in there. Folks, I realize today's video was all talk and not a whole lot of show, except for drilling a couple holes and sharpening a couple bits. But I wanted to follow up on the arbor that we made here and the flanger washers that we made. I mentioned in those videos what I was doing and said that I would show you the final product. So here it is. I hope you got a little something out of it. And if you're not interested in buying a electric drill sharpener, and you've got access to a benchtop grinder or the material to make your own station, I'd highly recommend this product. Again, hope you got a little enjoyment and pleasure out of watching it. Take care, and I'll see you on the next video.